This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, the journey through life. And we're all on it. We can't get out of it. Although some of us do get stuck in the maze. And, I've been there. And that's why this podcast is so important to me because I have to remind myself daily my challenges are my opportunities. And with those opportunities, I can be the person that I want to be. My guest today is Victoria, and I'm going to let you pronounce your own last name because I will totally mess it up.
Pelletier.
Pelletier. Okay. Um, and Victoria, when I read your bio, um, you're amazing. You've done so many things, and you're helping other people find that inner self that you have. So, how did this happen? I don't think you were typically born with it.
No, no. So I do have quite the journey, quite the story. I didn't share it as openly as I do now until probably 10 or 12 years ago. And it was, I attribute it as my why. It's what's been my driver for me. So I start from, early childhood. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me. I was in and out of the child welfare system. Fortunately, she agreed to give me up for adoption, and I was adopted out of that environment when I was about 4 years old. Still had very vivid memories of it. Lots of injuries, cigarette in my eye, I'd wore patches, like you name it. And raised by particularly my mother, an incredible woman, so loving, lower socioeconomic position. So I remember my mom said to me, and my mom is the woman that raised me. She said, Tori, you need to do better than us. And she meant make sure, from an education standpoint, vocationally, my dad was a janitor, she was a secretary. But I'll tell you, Karen, I don't think she ever needed to utter those words to me because I was determined to be better than biology or circumstance.
Oh,
So I share that because that's what has propelled me to be as driven as I am today, to be better today than I was yesterday.
and that's a very important message because so many of us we try to do better, but we get stuck in a rut. And when we get stuck in that rut, we think, okay, this is where I am. I'm never going to get any better. And there once was a time in my life I felt that way. Okay, this is the best it gets. Just suck it up. But as soon as I thought that, I fought it. It was like, no, it has to be better than this. And even if it's not, if I don't try to find the end of the rainbow, I'm going to be stuck. And so obviously, you had just enough understanding at a young age that your mother didn't have to tell you to do better, but you knew that was something that you needed to do, not for anybody else, but for you.
Yeah, very much so. I think, yeah, I spend a lot of time like coaching, or I'll just talk about resilience. And, we can't prevent all of the adversity or challenge that's going to come our way. But what I'm trying to encourage people is to recognize you have a choice in how you respond to it. And that doesn't mean we don't grieve in the moment for whatever has, come our way or when we fall down and make mistakes, but that the choice we have is getting back up, anchoring back to a goal or objective or the vision that we have for ourselves, and being committed and intentional around moving forward with that. And so this is why I'm not one who supports kind of the victimhood that happens. Again, we have a moment and we can tell our story. But again, how we move forward becomes our choice.
Now, I belong to this group on Facebook. It's called The Ethels, and it's through AARP. There's some phenomenal women out there, but there's a problem with women 50 and up today, and that is they think they've gotten to that plateau, and this is all I am. And maybe I didn't have the best marriage, or maybe I had a great marriage, but my kids don't want any part of me, or I've lost my job, or I want a better job, but they're stuck. And I see myself, that's where I was at 50. And it was like, I kicked myself in the rear end because I saw people like you out there saying, hey, take a step forward. If you don't take a step forward, you're never going to get there. So tell us about some of the steps you had to take forward to get to where you are.
Well, so I started working very early at age 11. I'm sure that's probably not allowed in today's times. But I worked in a hair salon, and that's because although I never had food insecurity. They were always closed. There was not money for extras. So no, we never went on vacations, that kind of thing. So if there was anything extra I wanted, I needed to buy it for myself. So I worked from a very early age. That in itself actually also gave me this energy. This was a place I could thrive. Again, I'm in control of my performance, and I felt very much in control, period. And so by 14, I had become the assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at. I graduated high school a little bit early. So at 16, I went off to university. And you talked about wanting certain things for your life and how things have changed. I thought from a young child I was going to be a lawyer. I think my mom had me watch so many episodes of LA Law with her that was the path I was going on. And you know what? It turns out I loved the corporate world. I got promoted up through the ranks quickly. And what I thought was just putting off law school for a period of time never happened. So I followed my passion. And again, I was in charge. I've now achieved what, lots of people will look at externally and say a level of success. I became a C-suite executive in my early 20s. It was a massive stretch role for me, but I have always shown up with confidence, even when I didn't feel that way.
Right.
And worked hard to understand how success was measured in those environments, worked hard to become a better kind of leader. Because I think being a 24-year-old chief operating officer, the youngest by a couple decades, the only woman around the table, I happen to be a member of the LGBTQ community. I was married to a woman prior to now being married to my husband. All of those made me go, oh my gosh, like I need everyone to recognize I've earned my seat at the table, no questions asked. So I was, a leader that showed up in the way I learned command and control. I'm not going to show you, vulnerability. I'm not going to show you emotions. And that shifted over time by doing what I just did with you for your listeners, sharing my story, being vulnerable. That created a different kind of relationship with my team. And by the way, it was incredibly freeing. So that then I've had that. I always will tell people like, you are the CEO of whether it's your brand, it's your career. Do not put anyone in the driver's seat but you. And so I've chosen that. I use a phrase around being strategically intentional around where I want to go, but also, going with the flow to some extent and, going with opportunities that may present themselves that weren't necessarily on the original path.
And, you talked about being in places, not really having the confidence, but not letting that show. And so many people talk about this as the imposter syndrome. And my comment is, it is not really the imposter syndrome. We sort of know that we're going to pick up on what's going on around us. So we may not know it all right now, but we're going to get better at it. So, am I tricking you that I know everything? No, I'm not coming out and saying I know everything, but I'm telling you that I do belong here. And when I started coaching officially last year, I've had my certificate for a couple of years. And my son just like got very upset with me. And he said, Mom, what are you doing? You've got your certification. You basically were coaching in all the jobs you had previously. Why aren't you doing it? And I realized I hadn't built that confidence in me. I had the confidence that I had papers that said I could coach, but I didn't know if I really could. And he said, and you won't know until you do what, Mom? And it was like, you are absolutely correct. And so I just went out and threw something out on Facebook and said, hey, I'm coaching. And I was swamped. It was like, I don't want to be this busy, but I knew that there was that opportunity. When you let it out to the world, you have those opportunities. So like you said, you started at a very young age. Did you have a childhood?
Uh, not in the way most people would, expect. I think my early years with my biological mother made me grow up fast. Adopted, and I was the only child. And so my time was spent with adults. I skipped a couple grades in school. So again, I was always with people older than myself, and I started working very young. So I wasn't the one, although my mom, I think she was desperate. She bought me like the Barbie van and all this stuff. Like I just wasn't one to really play with
Yeah.
toys. I was an avid reader. I remember reading Stephen King at like 10 years old. And so I did grow up. I did grow up quickly. Um, and so I think that, I mean, but that helped me from a business standpoint because now I also I'm only 5'8", but I did hit this height by the time I was like 10 or 11. So when I was working, I acted mature because I looked so much bigger and taller than everyone else. So I blended in very, very well. And so, no, I didn't have a childhood in the way most others did. So when I had my own children, I wanted to give them the childhood that I never had.
Uh,
And there's a fine line because I also want them to appreciate hard work and the value of a dollar. And just because I've done well professionally and been able to afford a lifestyle for them that my parents couldn't, it's this balance of like, trying to give them all those things, but teach them, that what hard work means as well.
and something that I've heard a lot since I have been coaching individuals who feel that they were pushed to grow up have this resentment, and especially those who were pushed to grow up but truly did not. And I think there's a difference in their story than yours. Okay. Yes, you were sort of forced in this situation that you took it upon yourself to grow up. Okay. And it's interesting that the things that you went through until age 4 really impacted you because a lot of people would have like hid that away and not want to talk about it and not want to work from it. So, is there anything in particular that happened either before adoption or when you got adopted that really struck the chord that said, I've got to be better?
Um, I continued to have pretty significant challenge. So beyond what happened with Julie, my biological mother, uh, there were struggles in school, but for the opposite reason. I was very gifted, and at the time, the schools didn't know how to deal with it. And so my mother was so incredible at pushing for it that ultimately I ended up skipping a couple grades to. Um, I was sexually assaulted at 14. And so that kind of instance to just ongoing. And I think ultimately beyond sort of the trauma or adversity that I experienced, some of that created um, deep-seated insecurity and in myself. Am I worthy? If my biological mother, your mother's supposed to be the person in the world to protect you the most and hold you tight, could abuse me as she did, and ultimately be okay with giving me up for adoption, am I worthy? And so I didn't feel that for a long time. My mom was this like powerhouse of, and I didn't realize it at the time. It was really in my adulthood. I remember her sitting me down to try and do a ton of self-reflection. Like, why are you feeling this way? Like, let's unpack this when you act out in a certain way. And I hated it because she'd sit me down for hours as a teenager. I'm like, oh my God, mom, like, this is the last thing I want. But that ability to now look inward and understand where the emotion comes from, where the fear, where the insecurity comes from, and then start to model different thinking, different language, different actions and behaviors. That's helped me dramatically. And I think there's also, I do believe you can develop a stronger sense of resilience and a healthier way to be resilient. But I also think innately there's something in some people's DNA, in fight or flight. I've always been a fighter and I've always been competitive. So even when I didn't believe in myself, I wanted to do more, better, be the best at whatever it is I was doing. So that helped propel me in it. But yet I didn't believe the hype, the success. I didn't believe in me probably until like into my late 20s and early 30s.
So, you mentioned that even as young as your early 20s. Okay. You were an executive. Um, and I picture this as this tall, lean young woman comes in. She's got a title. What does that do to the people around you, especially your male counterparts? Because um, I was in a situation, oh, probably in my 30s, where I took a job in an accounting firm. They were all male. I really didn't feel I belonged. And truthfully, I hate numbers. So I'm not sure what I was there. But I did the same thing like you. I walked in and this is my space. And I found a lot of the men who knew more than me cowered around me. And I didn't like it because I come from a different generation, that either I wanted to be equal or I wanted them to be just slightly superior over me, only because I knew what I didn't know.
Hmm.
So, how are the men around you?
It's been interesting. In I have there's certain personality traits, and I hate that we genderize them. They're like, oh, this is like feminine energy and
Right.
feminine this or whatever. I don't. There's traits that people have, and I have always, I said, I showed up with confidence, and in large part because I recognized early on confidence is perceived as competence. So again, when I didn't feel it, like let me portray this so no one questions what experience I do or don't have. But I've also I operate with radical candor. Long before Kim Scott wrote that book and coined the phrase, the ability for me to be direct, I've never shied away from tough conversations. Uh, but from a place of care and compassion. And as I learned to be a better, different leader, I built different relationships with people. So it was received so much more effectively. Um, but because I have traits and people tend to put those into buckets, I've been told how masculine I am in many ways. I've seen the traits that my male counterparts that we share, they'll be told, oh, they're very assertive. For me, I'm aggressive or I'm a B word. To I have heard, well, I'm not going to take, I heard it sort of secondhand through others, like, I don't want to have to take, directions from this. And at the time, it also had to do with my age. This young woman, what does she know? And so I've experienced a lot of that. But I've never been afraid of that. I still, the last number of years, I've worked in sort of technology companies, and there's still a shortage of women.
Right.
And so I walked into like a strategic executive meeting a few years ago that I was leading, and it was one of the largest boardrooms we had in this particular office, and it was me, one other woman, and 40 men. Um, that it saddens me that we don't have more diversity, but that doesn't change the way in which I'm going to operate. I'm going to show up. And the part that is attributed to, again, sort of more typically women, and you said it, you knew what you didn't know.
Right.
Same thing for me. I'm very comfortable saying with confidence, I don't know what I don't know. I know how to find people who do or educate myself, and I commit to come back to you, and I honor my commitments. And so that is generally what kind of shuts that
Right.
down as it relates to these gender differences.
It's interesting when you mention the IT world. My husband's been in the IT world since mid 80s. And he was working for Microsoft in the mid 80s, and they needed an alpha tester. I knew nothing. I said to him, "What's an alpha tester?" He said, "Do not worry. You're going to get a computer, and they're going to send you some instructions. And then you're going to have to do certain things and report back." And when I told people what I was doing, they said, "Why would you do that?" Well, number one, I found it interesting. Number two, I was adding things to my resume. And that's what I want people to understand, that some of the things that we do may not necessarily be what we really want to do, but that knowledge that we learn from it is incredible. And it's because of doing that when I decided to start my podcasting business, I knew what I needed. I knew how to go find those things. I knew how to set it up. Now, did I let my husband set it up? Absolutely, because he runs wires all the time and connections. It was like, but I'm going to oversee it and make sure that it's being done the way I want it. How do you help women overcome the fact that it's not that they're competing with men, they're just being their best self?
Well, there's data that shows, sadly, that women, whether it's confidence, or the opposite and fear, drives women not applying for new roles or for promotions unless they believe they achieve like 9 or 10 out of the 10 requisite skills that are listed. Men do it at five or six. And so a lot of the time I spend, coaching women to again have confidence in the value, the experience, and the skills they bring to the table. Where they believe they don't have it, many of the what's in their background is transferable, and or the propensity to learn those new skills and walk in again with that confidence. So I find myself needing to you know, be kind of the biggest cheerleader in many instances for women to have the confidence to take that step forward. So I think many women opt themselves out of things because of, again, fear of rejection, of the insecurity in their ability to deliver, or lack of confidence in themselves, and coupled with the challenges of those who choose to be partnered and those who choose to have children. Or maybe it's the sandwich generation of parents that they're taking care of.
Right.
Like, what does that look like? And then that comes with a whole other conversation and a set of boundaries that you need to create as well. So it's those two different sets of dynamics that I think continue to cause, beyond the patriarchal world that we see in people hiring people that look like them, the lack of diversity in many places.
Absolutely. Well, I do know, again, I thank my husband 1,000 times over that he had the confidence that I could do this and not embarrass him because he worked for the company directly. Um, and it took me to many places I never thought I would go. And
Mm.
that's one of the messages that I share with my clients and my audience, is that if you don't take that step forward, like my son said, you're never going to know. And you're going to be sitting in your chair saying, what if? And you know what? Life is too short for what ifs. And you appear to have proven that. And you also appear that, even with all your ability, you still, are married, you have children, you have family. Yeah, it is balancing. I will, I'm not going to tease anybody out there and say, oh no, it's a piece of cake. Because even now with two grown sons who live in different states, and it's my husband and I, there still is a balancing act. He works out of the house, I work in the house. Working in the house, sometimes my days are 12 and 14 hours, and he's coming home from work and it's like, honey, I'm home. And it's like, the door's closed. I can't talk right now, but I do learn to balance, and so does he. So, the women that you are helping, are you seeing a different type of younger woman today who is more directed into, I need to take care of me and I need to be the best version of myself, rather than my generation that said, yes, I'm going to go to college. And along with that degree, I'm going to get my MRS and I'm going to have a baby and whatever.
Yeah, I do see, from managing multi generations in the workforce, I see differences that aren't attributed purely to one's personality or lived experiences. I do think some of it is very much generational. I interestingly, I'm in transition for C-suite, role myself, and I was interviewed and I was shocked by this. By a question in this day and age where I've moved around every 2 or 3 years. That is more uncommon for my generation and very uncommon for my parents' generation, extremely so for today's generation, though, who are moving around generally every 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm being asked this. And now I've been a part of 40 mergers and acquisitions and more corporate restructure than I can count. Many times I've put myself into the restructure and planned that. And so I find that the newer generation has very different expectations of work. And I actually just say don't talk about work-life balance. It's about integration between those two things. And so the newer generation, and I do think COVID helped change the mindset, not only for this generation, but certainly, mine and the other generations as well, to think much more around doing work that has purpose. And for companies and for leaders, that respect the sort of whole human that shows up, trust the employees much more so to, we proved we could work from home, so that trust the employees and the kind of work that they want to do aligns with purpose and impact. And to your point, allows them to achieve whatever balance they're looking for. Now, what I will counter that with is I think there's this generation still doesn't understand, and there's an expectation, not, and this is a broad generalization because there's many who are not like this that I've seen, but they expect that it will come to them. So I was a complete anomaly to step into a chief operating role at age 24. Yes, I had lots of work. It's very rare to happen. So when I'm telling people that story, I'm like, please do not expect that came with years and years of work. And by the way, I've worked 60 to 80-hour weeks plus. Recognize to achieve what you want, still going to come with hard work. And you're not always going to have the balance. It's not, the way that we've seen in this quiet quitting and great resignation the last couple of years. So as a leader, it's super challenging to manage these very different generations and their expectations in the workforce.
Well, one of the things I've learned about, so I have two sons, they're 15 years apart, so their generations are a little bit different. One is an attorney and he works hours upon hours. The other one is in sports, and he has learned that in order to get ahead is the hard work, but he also has to do something just a little bit different than the last person and a little bit different than what the next person might bring to the table. And I never thought I would see that in him because he used to be this very black and white person. He wanted to play baseball, but he wanted to play by the exact rules that the major leaguers play by. So when he joined the team at school or recreational, he got kicked off the team because he didn't want to play their rules. He wanted to play real rules. But it took him a while and he's learned. And there are days that my heart goes out to him. Now he's 1,000 miles away from me. But I can tell he is exhausted. He's burned out. He's worked 3 12-hour days in a row. But he also has learned how he can tell management, I need some space. I've done my job. Believe in me. I will be back at it tomorrow. But if I don't take time for me today, I'm not going to be any good tomorrow. And I'm finding that there are a lot of companies that are listening to young people today saying, yes, I see the hours you're working. My last corporate job, I was working 50, 60 hours a week. And I was getting calls on the weekend. And when I asked for a half a day off because I wanted to go to the dentist, it was like, no. It was like, but I'm way over hours. But I didn't know how to ask properly. I didn't know how to show my worth so that me being gone for 4 hours wasn't going to cause any harm to the company. So how do clients find you? You obviously are in a lot of corporations and your fingers are in a lot of pots.
Yes. I describe myself as a multi-potentialite, meaning that I have many diverse interests and passions and things that I pursue. So I am a corporate executive by day, quote unquote, but I have long since had a side hustle that I do not want it to be my full time. I love that it's just a part of the portfolio career that eventually will be the full time, and that is as a professional public speaker, speaking on a variety of topics from personal branding, overcoming adversity and being resilient, to leadership and culture, etc. I've also written several books. I'm not very good at being idle. So, like, while I have been in transition in the past year, I wrote 2 books. One that came out in January on personal branding. One that will come out in in this fall on leadership and culture. And so people can find me and lots of content that I share, including the podcast that I'm on my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes. They don't need to figure out how to spell that. And then if they want to connect with me on the different social media platforms, they can do that directly from there.
Well, we'll make sure that's all in the show notes, because I think that's very important. We listen to podcasts and then, after it's over, how am I supposed to reach her? Well, I remind everybody, it's always in the show notes. And if you can't find it in the show notes, all you have to do is contact us at New Cleveland Radio. We will get you in touch with our guest in Victoria. It was wonderful. And now I have to, I think I'm going to rethink a few things. Listening to the way you spoke today, it's like, maybe there are certain parts of my life that I need to be more confident, and I think I can do that. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.